Hello, this is Kirsteen's Aesthetic Art and Travel. I started this YouTube channel because whenever I tell people I'm an artist, they usually tell me, "Oh, I wish I could do more art, but I don't know how," or "I got discouraged," or "I don't know where to start," or "I can't pay for lessons," or any number of reasons that I felt I could address in a YouTube channel, and also just share my skill for anyone who's interested. For their enjoyment. Now today I thought I'd talk about painting flowers. Painting as opposed to drawing. So drawing is often, although not always, creating outlines and then filling them in. Whereas painting is often, although not always, more a case of creating blocks of colour. So for example, if I'm going to draw this tulip on a piece of paper here, I'm going to look at shapes of petals and say to myself, there we go, I've got a basic shape of that one. And later I might come in and do light and shade or fill this in some way, but I'm basically creating lines that represent the outside edges of the solid objects, if you see what I mean. But things are not outside edges, they are solid objects. So painting in some ways is more truthful than drawing, if you see what I mean. So here we go, I've got outside shapes that represent these whole petals in my drawing, and of course I could colour it in with paint, but a more sort of truthful way to represent something is actually to create the blocks of colour that things are as you see them. The change from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions is obviously another sort of untruthful trick. I don't mean to diminish drawing, I'm just explaining the difference. So usually when I paint, I might well decide to paint little outlines because an artist can decide whatever they want. Art is a dictatorship and you're the boss. Or I might well decide to draw only with tonal areas, so I might sit there and just shade the darkest bit and not have any outlines at all. And indeed, by the time I've shaded in the whole thing, you would usually expect the outlines to disappear in the process of the shading. So you could say that those were guidelines, and later you shade it until you have a solid object, which will have different tonal values. Now, tonal values is how dark or light something appears. So glancing over this lovely tulip, one of the darkest bits is in here, and one of the lightest bits is on here. So if I am shading this, I'm constantly looking for the tonal values. Where is it darker? Oh, it's darker up that side of the leaf because the leaf is round and catching the light there, rounded. And where is it the most dark? I've actually put the stem behind this leaf, but don't worry about that. It's in front. There you go. So it's most dark down next to the stem there. And that's where the most shade would go in, and where you would use your softest pencils as well. So that's outline and then tonal value. So when I come to paint, as I've painted with this one, I didn't actually draw any outlines at all. You of course can give yourself guidelines. I often use a really pale ochre colour to draw guidelines if I'm painting with acrylics or oils, because I know that by the time the thick acrylics or oils have gone over it, the ochre is just going to more or less disappear. So here's an ochre colour. I could sketch with that. But if you're going to use watercolours, then you just have to go ahead and get it right first time, because watercolours won't cover this. If I'm going to put white watercolour on top of this. So if I was going to put acrylics, which are basically plastic, or oils, which are indeed oil and pigment, on this, it would completely cover this pale ochre. I could put white acrylic on there and it would be gone. So it becomes a perfectly good way to sketch in ochre on a canvas or something, and then I've got the basic idea of where things are and I can start putting down blocks of colour. But with watercolours you have to just get in there. So my first block of colour that I'm going to put in is the stem. The stem is obviously not one colour. Almost nothing is one colour. Almost everything has a dark side and a light side, or a highlight. And once you get used to the idea that leaves are seldom green, they usually have a green side and a yellow side. So if you're painting a leaf, here you go, a block of green, for example, or any object. So let's just use the leaf example. A block of green leaf has an absolute deadness about it compared with, there's going to be a light side and a dark side almost always. So I make a block of green. I realize that I'm not observing a leaf, so this is just a very basic shape, but you'll still see what I mean. And it has a light side. Boom, so much more alive. So you got to look for the sunlight hitting things. In this case, it's coming mostly through the window from that side. I have north light, which is lovely and even, and it's coming in from this side. So I'm getting much more light on this side of my tulip than I am on this side of my stem. So I've made a block of colour, but I'm actually going to make 2 blocks of colour, light side colour and dark side colour. This is a very yellowy green on the stem. And as soon as I put in a light side and a dark side block, the thing looks more 3D and more alive. Now, I think the bright coloured tulip was a lot easier colour-wise than the white one, this bright one, because there's such vivid differences between everything, whereas this one has to be shades of pale white. But let's have a go anyway. Just very light bit on the end of the leaf, much greener bit. Now, lots of people get very worried and spend a long time colour matching, getting the perfect match of colour, and sitting there, you know, talking about how to match colours. I barely bother. I just find something with a similar tonal value that I like. So tonal value, again, the lightness or darkness. So as long as it has a light area and a dark area, it's going to look 3-dimensional. And then when it comes down to colour, I literally use something I fancy. Like, oh, that looks nice. You know, let's have that. Is my colour philosophy, and it really doesn't matter to me if it's the exact colour of the original object, because it's my painting. If I like it, then it's a legit colour. However, if you do want to colour mix, I do have a tutorial on the colour wheel, which will help a little bit with the basics. And I can do a good deal more on colour mixing and how it's done. But like I say, I think it gets over-laboured as a, oh, I can't paint because I can never mix up the right colours. Well, don't mix up the right colours. Mix up some colours you like and use them. You know, who says they're right? It's your painting. So actually, just to take the pressure off there, rather than to devalue being good at colour mixing, if you are, that's great. But if you feel like it's stopping your painting because all you do is fiddle around and fail to get the right colour, I would just let that one go, you know. So it's not the right colour, it's a colour. As long as it has a light bit and a dark bit, like I say, it will look lovely in 3D. So, pink. The edges of this tulip are pink. And I don't actually have any pink in my watercolour palette here, so red and white. Obviously, a few basics like, you know, mixing red and white will make you a nice pink are good, very good to know. So when I say don't worry too much about colour mixing, there's no harm in getting your palette and sitting around playing with things and discovering that red and white will give you pink. And any amount of playing with paint, experimenting on bits of paper, messing around and figuring things out is worthwhile, having fun. Just absolutely the business of artists to mess around and have fun, because you will discover things that you will later turn into great works of art. Plus, I've heard it said that you need 10,000 hours of practice to be in any way decent at anything. So, while I'm not sure it needs to be quite that many, if you do the right study in the first place, it can help you jump forward faster, and you might have transferable skills as well. For example, when I came to learn to make things out of silver clay, I'd already done thousands of hours of messing around with plasticine and messing around in potteries with clay, and silver clay was just another kind of clay, so I felt like I could learn that really quickly and make jewelry out of the silver clay. So you see, this is building up with blocks of colour rather than outline. And I'm looking for, where is it lighter, where is it darker? This leaf, for example, has a really dark side and a light side. And, where can I make a block of colour for my next bit, rather than attempting to draw with paints, which will lead you to be tearing your hair out in frustration because they're not fine and careful kind of media. They're a splashy kind of media. Media means a thing that you use for doing art, like pencils, paints, oil pastels, watercolours, etc. Good. So, blocks of colour. Let me choose another flower. Whoops. I have this whole bunch of flowers, which is nice. So here's a non-tulip, because I picked 2 tulips to look at. Again, if I'm going to draw one of these, paint one, then I'm looking for outlines, drawing round all these little leaf shapes. But if I'm going to paint them, then, be brave, pick a bigger brush, and boom, just lay down blocks of colour where get something with the right kind of range and plonk in blocks. There's a yellowy colour in the middle. It's kind of more of a yellowy green than a yellow. And the stem is a bit yellowy, but I'll come back to it. So you can see. And then, obviously, like I said, most things are not a single colour. So you're looking for, does it have a dark side? Let's create the dark side. It's all like Star Wars. Everything has, the Force has a dark side. And they have to exist in balance. Or indeed darker petals. Like this whole flower is lighter on that side than it is on this side. You're starting to build up areas which have a tonal value closer to the flower. Obviously you can put, here's the stem, you can put in tiny careful details. I don't mean that a person isn't allowed to paint and be careful. I just mean it's not the same kind of creating a thing with lines. So for example, there are literally lines on this stem, but even those have a dark side and a light side on the ridges. And so you can decide how much detail you think works well with a thing. But building it up in blocks is the way to go with paint. And looking for the lighter bit and the darker bit. As I come back over here, you can see down in the base of these petals it's darker. See if I can mix up put a bit of blue in my brown to make it darker. That's always a good tip. Try not to mix colours with black. So black is good for painting black objects. or black lettering or anything that is literally black in real life. But when it comes to colour mixing, it tends to make the colour reflect less light and therefore deaden it. So when you mix things, try to use a little of whatever is more or less opposite it on the colour wheel instead. So you can darken a green with a little bit of dark red, and you can darken yellow with a little bit of purple. And you have a look at my colour wheel tutorial, have a look at the colour wheel, and you'll start to see that there's a colour opposite. And if you want to mix that colour in, or any actual colour that is darker and might darken it, you can experiment with that rather than just constantly mixing white, which will give you pastel-y colours, and black, which will give you dead colours. So, you know, have a look around and say to yourself, well, I've got this brown and I want to make it lighter. Oh, I could put a bit of yellow in to make it lighter. It is actually a yellowy brown, rather than immediately mixing white, which, like I say, turns into pastel, or immediately mixing black, which gives you dead. So, there you go. Building up from sections rather than drawing with lines. It's a really good way to paint with watercolours and with acrylics and with oils, and looking for those tonal values, looking for the light areas and the dark areas. While colour matching is a good idea, try not to get so anxious about colour matching that it stops you working, and remembering that every object is usually not one flat colour, it's usually multiple colours. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, I recommend you like and subscribe, and maybe hit the bell for notifications. And you can also comment any questions about art or any things you'd particularly like me to cover, and I'll do my best to help. Thank you. Bye bye.